G'day everyone, it's James Davis from the Paxade Academy again, and this time around I've got Tim and Andrew from SherpaTech. Thanks for joining me, guys.
Thanks, James.
Thanks, James. Great to be here again.
I'm excited to have this conversation. It's something that not a lot of people are talking about in the MSP space openly, and it's all about insurance. And I've got you guys on because you can turn such a dry topic into something that's enjoyable and practical for people to take away. And I'm going to put you on the spot, and we're going to dive in quickly. And you work with a lot of MSPs, and when they come to you, are they often covered like they should be, or do you see glaring gaps in their own coverage, let alone their clients?
You can take that one, Andy.
Okay, I'll grab it. Yeah, I tell you, James, we've learnt a lot through our insurance health checks, and one of the first areas that we look into is looking at the business activities that are in the proposal. And the proposal forms an integral part of the insurance contract. So looking at the proposal and then comparing it with the insurance that's already in place, and we see a lot of gaps. And what that flows through to, in the case of a claim, it gives the insurer an opportunity to walk away. So as Tim and I know well, we spend a lot of time just cleaning up those gaps, and often the MSP will say, hey, we do on the website, we do a whole lot of, say, security type work, MSSP type work, but there's no mention of it in the proposal. And therefore, the insurer, in the case of a claim, can use that and say, hey, you haven't been honest with us. And that mutual honesty is so critical in insurance. You know, you're honest about your risks that you're undertaking, and the insurer's honest about the coverage that they'll provide in the case of a claim.
That's really interesting. Just that whole website advertising, and then what you're actually showing to the insurance provider. I'm not sure a whole lot of MSPs would know that's a thing and something that they should be thinking about.
They certainly should. And you know, it's most of the MSPs want to grow their business, right? And so they promise the world on the website, but they don't necessarily do it. You know, a lot of the times we have discussions. Tim and I will have the discussion, and they'll say, "Oh, well, it's on our website. However, actually, we don't do it." Well, so which is a concern in itself, but. It's just something that you've just got to be straight up about the risks you're undertaking and the activities you're undertaking as an MSP.
And so from there, what are the typical areas of coverage that they haven't sort of thought about and are typically the most glaring gaps? I know this is a piece of string thing, and you guys are very used to detail.
Yeah.
But
we get a lot of it from the changing nature of the services that MSPs offer. So what we typically find is it was probably 2-3 years ago, their proposal was accurate. But as services have gone more to the cloud, cloud now has a wider definition. Insurers actually offer different types of definitions around different types of cloud, value-added reseller, just license reselling, cloud hosting, whereas a couple of years ago, Jewel, for one of the underwriters, only just had cloud as one big category, and there's 1,000 different things we could fit in there. As they update their metrics for how they measure things, it's important that we bubble that to the surface as well.
Yeah, and a lot of MSPs, just to add on that, a lot of MSPs provide host reseller services. You know, they sell their Microsoft stack or Sophos stack, and a lot of those resellers are host activities, but the MSP is just acting as a reseller of those activities. So they need to be correctly identified in the proposal so that the underwriter understands. Sometimes the underwriters don't understand, and that's where probably you need your broker to help that articulation to make sure that it's all buttoned up, and it's certainly something that we do at SherpaTech.
I haven't heard, in talking to a lot of MSPs around the region, a lot of MSPs aren't talking about when they're doing their insurance renewals that they're going to this sort of depth. It seems to be a more of a tick and flick exercise of it's coming up to renewal. What's the best price we can do? Move on. Why do you think that is? Why do you think insurance is treated that way?
Well, we're all time poor, and it comes at comes around once a year. It's usually forgotten about. It's usually the broker might wait until the last couple of weeks because he's busy, and the MSP doesn't want to fill out the forms because they're busy. And so what we find is to try and go to the market a bit earlier. Start 8 weeks out, get all the documentation in early, and then that gives us the right amount of time to remarket risks. So, and what we're finding at the moment is now with restricted cover, so underwriters are dropping the amount of coverage they're providing. You might need $10 million professional indemnity, but an underwriter like a Chubb is only offering 5. So we have to follow that to build up the stack to be able to enable you to be able to do the government contracts that you might have already contracted that you need the insurance for. It's sometimes it's a time issue, and it's also assessing the right risks in the right frameworks as well. But the earlier we go and the more information we get, the easier it is for everyone involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And okay, don't mean to plug what we do, but a little bit. But what we try and do is capture the information on our portal, so that it's much easier to do. But two, when the renewal happens the following year, that information is already captured, and you just have to do the adjustments rather than streaming through pages and pages of written documents, PDFs, etc. Just to make life easier for the customers. It's really important.
Well, you going back a few steps where you mentioned, if we're not providing the right information to the insurers, and they could step back and not cover a claim. Are you seeing that happening more and more from your experience, or is it still something on the horizon that's going to come?
Yeah, we're seeing it much more in the cyberspace. The professional indemnity. Probably less, but the cyberspace, absolutely. So the losses have been so significant in the last couple of years. So the loss ratio for cyber globally last year was 120%. So for $100 of premium, there was $120 of claims paid out. And that's not even covered the admin cost for the insurer and all the other bits and pieces that go along with it. And so those cyber insurers are actually bleeding. And so what they've done, as mentioned earlier, that what they've done is reduce the cover and increased premium. And a lot of insurers have actually walked away from the space because they've been so burnt. And so any reason for, I shouldn't say any reason, that's a bit tough on the insurers, but you don't want to leave the door open for them to say, oh, well, you misinformed us, therefore we're not going to pay. And it's really critical, and we spend a lot of time talking to our customers about that very thing. Hey, just don't leave any gates open.
Okay. And what are you seeing as they're changing how they're insuring? What are the sort of requirements that are starting to line up for MSPs to be insured in the first place and then actually get proper coverage?
Yeah, well, it's a bit, something that we've been talking about a lot, and maybe Tim, you're better positioned to talk about this, about buying a COC versus getting solid, robust cover and using insurance as a risk mitigator.
Yeah, but I mean, we definitely see it with some of the more mature MSPs. They understand why they hold insurance, and so they put a lot more time into their programs to ensure they have the right business activities, they understand their exclusions, they understand any endorsements on the policy, whereas some of the more growing MSPs, we find they'll just buy a COC because they've finally got to a stage where one of their customers asks them to hold professional indemnity, so they take it out. And it's a little bit of a journey as you go through those growth levels as an MSP, where you have to realise, my clients are asking me to hold this for a reason, and that's where you want to make sure that it will respond and it will pay out if it needs to be called on. And once you're paying money for it, you might as well make sure it's going to respond, and it doesn't take that much more effort. So we really try to help MSPs understand what the insurance is there to cover as well. I know when I had my own business and I was growing, I fully didn't understand why I was holding those insurances. So it was only as we went through different stages of growth that then you start to actually unpack how the risk mitigators work. And if you need to call on it, you definitely want it to respond.
Absolutely. So, on the other extreme, we have people that call us and go, oh, I've just got a contract with New South Wales government, and what they need 10 mil PI, 20 mil PL. I just want the cheapest insurance. I just want the certificate to get us over the line for that contract. So that's the customer that we don't necessarily, we kind of cringe with, because they're not, they're buying the COC just to get that contract over the line, whereas it needs more understanding. You're buying it for a reason. You're buying it because it's there to respond in the case of a claim. So that's why we spend the time with the customers, to help them unpack their risk profiles, to find the right insurer and get them set up and have the insurance piece as a proper mitigation in addition to the people, process and technology, that first layer of defense.
I'm seeing some similarities with how MSPs talk about how they operate with their clients, about educating the clients on how something like a backup works. We don't need a backup until something goes wrong. It's similar to insurance, isn't it? But we talk about our clients, and when they don't engage in that education process, that they're not really the right fit. But it's interesting that a lot of MSPs don't quite engage in the insurance process that way. And you guys have worked with a lot of different people now. I'm curious, from your perspective, why do you think that is? Why do you think people don't engage in a more partnership level and trying to understand what they need to reduce their risks?
I think it comes down to a lot of people, they don't know what they don't know. So if you've never had an insurance claim or been through that process, you probably don't appreciate it. And a lot of people I've heard say, oh, well, I put this down and the insurer never had a problem with it. And that's because they haven't had the claim. So one of the things we do in our sales process is actually almost treat the insurance application like it's a claim. So we test it as it goes through. Andrew and I have a lot of sort of hypothetical conversations about, how would this work or what would happen here? And there's a lot of grey. It's not black and white. So we have to then say, for the best of our knowledge, this is what we think would happen. And then you can, actually properly mitigate those risks with an eyes wide open approach. But it's not until you have a client that wants to go on that journey with you that you can actually really do that properly, because it has to be participative. We can't do the work for them. We can't assess all of their frameworks or tell them what to do. We have to work. We give advice, but it's up to the business owner to ultimately drive that improvement.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing, it's kind of related, but there's so much pressure on MSPs from their customer base to make sure that they're protected. And it's just it's increasing exponentially because of the complexity of the tech world. There's new products coming out every week. There's new innovation kicking in all the time. It's so fast moving, and certainly the insurance industry is behind the eight ball. And there's so much pressure by the customers to say, if they have a problem, the first port of call will be their MSP. And if the MSP is at all responsible, then they need to be protected, and they need to know what their responsibility is. The other thing we're seeing not enough of is making sure that the MSP is very clear about what they're responsible for, and then what the customer is responsible for. I might talk a little bit about the Privacy Act, the new Privacy Act changes that are flowing through in the coming months. So the Privacy Act, Privacy Act 1988 has been there for some time. They've got the data breach component of that. At the moment, the fines are max out at $2 million. And what's being planned is 116 new recommendations that are going to flow through into legislation. And part of and the reason for the recommendations is really to get Australia, who's been behind the eight ball, at the same level as GDPR in Europe and also the US, the different state legislations that are there. It's to bring us up to that level. For example, the fine piece, 2 million currently, it's going to move to 50 million. And that is going to have a huge pressure impact on the MSPs, because guess what? Their customers are going to be looking to the MSP to help shoulder some of the costs in the case of a data breach. So it's something that MSPs really need to be aware of, and it's a reason to really get sharp about the scope of what their work and their customers' work.
I think that's only going to be a good thing, but I think what scares me is there's still a lot of MSPs running around advising their clients not to get cyber insurance, as an example, because the MSP does all this stuff. And I just saw both of you cringe hard on that. Like when we're talking about the client side, what should an MSP actually be pushing the clients to have in terms of insurance to protect the client and protect the MSP at the same time?
See, we see that if an MSP advises their client to actually hold cyber insurance, it's actually a protection for the MSP, because under their professional indemnity advice, they're then covering themselves because they've encouraged the MSP to hold risk mitigators there over and above the activities the MSP is providing. And there's so many services within a cyber policy that actually are outside of the MSP's scope. So the IT consultancy side is only a very small component of it when it comes to the GRC, fines and penalties, communications. There's a number of areas that the cyber policy does outside of that. And we also sort of try to educate MSPs to put it up front, to actually tell their clients to communicate with their insurers in the way the insurer requires. Different insurers require different frameworks depending on the policy. So the MSP is well within their right to sort of ask their clients of, well, in your incident response plan, how do we contribute to that, and how does the insurer contribute to that? You know, if somebody has a data breach on the weekend, who's the first point of call? You know, how does that workflow work? And by them doing that up front, that protects their professional indemnity, because then they've done that advice proactively.
And just to sort of add on that, the first port of call needs to be the insurer. So if the customer has a cyber incident, they need to call their insurer, assuming they have a cyber policy. And the insurer will come running, and the insurer comes running because they're trying to reduce their exposure. So, and they have 24/7 response teams that want to jump in. And yes, it's some of the work could be done by the MSP, but not all. They probably can't do the communications piece, going out to all the stakeholders impacted. They probably can't deal with the regulator. They probably can't negotiate the fines and penalties with the regulator. And these are all things that are embedded in a good cyber insurance policy that the customer should be holding. And we reinforce that.
I suppose that point, Andy, it's all about the cyber policies are all about first party predominantly. So they're all about protecting the person who holds them. So the client holds their own cyber policy, and then the the MSP holds their own cyber policy to protect themselves in that first party case. Some good policies include third party cover, but that's only third party defence costs. It's not third party response costs. And those sort of nuances are some of the things that it really helps to understand a little bit better.
And, as night follows day, if the customer doesn't have cyber policy and has been hit by fines or penalties, even the current regime of $2 million, plus the cleanup, plus the business interruption, loss of customers, they will, it would make sense for them to go after and make claims against the MSP. So if the MSP, the wise thing is to do, tell your customers, you need cyber insurance. You need to get it in place.
And this is a bit of a put you guys on the spot, and I know it's it's not black and white like everything in the insurance world that you keep reinforcing. But to me, as I was hearing that, if I was an MSP owner, I'd almost have cyber incidents not covered under my typical MSA, because if I'm not putting in the right protections, then I'm having to carry it. Sounds actually like the cyber insurance will pay for the cleanup and response, rather than me wearing it as a gross margin thing that eats into my own business. Have I understood that correctly, or am I?
So we've got this clear, James. So what are you saying in your customer agreement, in your MSA? You exclude cyber incidents, in terms of scope of work, right?
Yep.
Okay. So if I was a customer, would I be accepting of that?
Depends what they're engaging on the
contract.
It depends what you're actually providing, aren't you? So this is the problem with...
So we saw this, James, with a recent cyber incident that was actually going through the courts at the moment, and they throw out unfair contract terms.
Yes.
So an MSP can't contractually exclude himself from certain liabilities, but I think you could reasonably put in their rates for response, but there's also many areas of the tech stack that quite often the MSP doesn't take ownership for, but they might have to be a contributor if there is a cyber incident. But the point you're raising is to actually deal with these things before they happen. To put mechanisms into the contract that say, in the event we have considered this, and that's all. They're all professional indemnity protections because it shows that you've considered them before. And we're now seeing underwriters want copies of those contracts because that gives them better understanding of how their MSP approaches risks, so they choose whether they do or don't want them. So in some instances, if an MSP of a certain maturity doesn't operate under their own contracts, the underwriters get very nervous.
Yeah, James, you raise it. You're challenging it, which is great. But at the end of the day, even the contract won't stop a customer making a claim against their MSP. It won't stop them. And Tim mentioned the Unfair Contracts Act as a prominent one, and we see that rearing its head.
By the way, we're not lawyers.
No. Thanks for that. When MSPs get very sharp with their contracts and say, okay, we're if you make a claim against us, it's limited to these amounts. That can get thrown out by the courts. So you've just got to be careful. I think back to the point where it won't stop your customer from making a claim against you. You've still got to defend that claim. You've got to pay for lawyers. You've got to fight it, even if the claim is vexatious, a BS claim. You've still got to fight it. It might cost you $50,000 to fight that claim. And again, this is where your professional indemnity insurance in this case comes in. It's so critical. Because that's probably the most important insurance, or the highest risk area for an MSP is around advice, and that insurance mitigation is professional indemnity. Yeah.
I think what you guys said very well, because I know I threw a hand grenade in there just to see how you'd respond.
That's the way it should be.
But what you're really talking about is us, MSPs. We always talk about our clients need to take on our advice, and we know technology. So actually, MSPs need to get better at getting these different areas of advice for our own business, because like what you guys have mentioned several times, the technology space has changed dramatically especially in the insurance space. But you need to be having someone that can actually keep up with this and provide you the right level of advice, not just a tick and flick exercise that we treat it as.
Oh,
And I
without
think,
doubt. Yeah, sorry to interrupt. Sorry. No, I was just going to say, we're seeing a lot of MSPs completing the cyber proposals for their customers, for example. And we're going, no, hang on. Do you know that brings you into providing advice around the insurance component for your customer? So it brings additional exposure. So we're saying, hey, be really careful about this. If you want to seek legal advice, do so. But you're really completing work that the customer needs to do.
I mean, one of the things you're saying there, James, is what we try to help people with our free insurance health check. And the best time to do that is not when you're trying to renew your insurance. It's actually better to do it, in the middle of the year or out of cycle, because then you get the right runway to have a plan to actually execute on it. And if there's glaring holes, we fix them when we find them. But quite often then we have a bunch of recommendations that will say, at the next renewal, now let's undertake, some of these recommendations. And ultimately it's the customer's decision. They don't have to take all our advice. They still get to, choose levels of cover, and we actually can't steer people in that direction as well. There's certain things we can and can't do as brokers. But one of the big things we can do is, really help them understand the complexities of their own insurances. So.
And you beat me to the punch, Andy. With I was going to ask the next
right.
question.
Okay.
It's going to be around that filling out the insurance forms for their clients.
Yeah, the proposals. Yeah.
It's super dangerous, like what you just said. So
yeah, and you've often there'll be questions that the MSP will need to answer. How many records do we hold? How, what's our DR policy? What are the activities that the MSP do on around the DR? There might be a bunch of things that need to be done, but the MSPs just need to be careful about how they share, they provide that information. It needs to be the customer completing the proposal, because that's an integral part of the insurance contract. It's really important just to be considered here.
So we spoke a bit about cyber security for our clients, and cyber security insurance for our clients, and that. One of the things that I've seen a lot more is the ignorance around cyber security insurance. MSPs, let's forget the ones that are recommending don't have it because we've got you covered. And we've said why that's a silly idea. So the ones that have said, yep, we need you to have cyber security as a default, I'm seeing them running into troubles because, say, something like an invoicing spoof, where the client gets an invoice and then they go and pay it. Is that sort of thing covered under cyber security insurance?
Tim, do you want to jump, or should I jump?
Yeah, so it's interesting as the insurers or underwriters get bigger claims from different sort of sections, they start to limit or ring fence them, and the email spoofing or the paying money away is now classified as social engineering or theft. And so it's quite common. It's quite expensive to insure for. And so most policies will have a sub-limit around it. So, we typically see people holding 50 or 100 grand sub-limited, cover there, because it doesn't wipe out large amounts of funds, in relation to other areas of the business, because you'll pick it up once those first payroll cycles happen. But having cover for it, is available. It is important to hold as well. And now there's minimum requirements on that as well. You need to have, checks and balances in place that, you can't change bank details without a phone call, and all those other risk mitigators in there as well. But, we've seen some quite large ones happen recently with, companies that did have a verification policy on WhatsApp and, they were hacked or other areas. So
it's a really concerning space, that social engineering piece, it's a real concern. And in another part of our business, we had one where they had a water company. The hacker hacked the water company, and our end client had a debt with this water company. The debt was about 200,000. The hackers sent the new invoice with new banking details to our customer and said, "Hey, we've changed our bank details. Please pay it away." And and the money was paid. 200 grand was paid away. Bang, gone. So never to be seen again. Bounced offshore within a day. Never to be seen again. So it's a real concern. But on the insurance side, interestingly enough, cyber is a very immature insurance type. Cyber insurance is a very immature insurance type. We call it a pimply teenager. Unlike professional indemnity or liability, which has been around for hundreds of years, and there's lots of precedent and lots of case law around it. And so this is very new insurance, 15 years old. And there's lots and lots of variation between insurers. And a lot of insurers won't even cover social engineering or crime. They just won't even touch it. And if they do, it'll be, as you mentioned, it'll be very, very sublimited to a very small amount, because these are big exposures for insurers.
So I'm taking it away that insurance is a very complicated world, and it's not super black and white, and that especially the way that we're going with the MSP space and cybersecurity is becoming more and more entrenched in what we do, that getting the right people around us to provide the advice more frequently sounds like a clever idea. We could talk about this for a long time, and you guys get super passionate about this stuff. I'm not sure how many people are that passionate about insurance, so well done.
Weird, right?
Someone's got to have the passion, don't they? And so
we love the business. At the end of the day, we love the business, and we like helping customers and people. There is complexity. There's a lot of complexity. It's not going away, and you need your insurance advisor to ask. You need to ask them good questions, and they need to be asking you good questions to make sure that you're protected properly. So ask them about what your cover, your cyber cover covers you for. Ask them what the sublimits are. Ask them what the exclusions are. Ask them what the endorsements are. These are critical questions for you to get knowledgeable.
Also, if you're not sure about something on your proposal forms, screen grab it, send it through, ask the question. We do a lot of that backwardsing and forwardsing. We hear of other people saying, "Oh, my broker didn't understand what on-prem or cloud was," and if that's the case, you need someone that actually understands what you're trying to insure. So that's where we play a different role.
I think those are some great next action steps, and I'd reiterate, going back to what we know, it's like backups.
Yep.
It's not just set and forget type of stuff. It's not about getting the cheapest, because when we need it, we really need it. So I think that if I was to leave a summary of all of this great conversation, should actually be a lot more proactive about this, and it's us as owners to get engaged with our advisors, because maybe your current advisors don't know you've outgrown them and you need to mature to someone else, or maybe they're there and they've tried to reach out in these sort of terms before, and then you've just sort of shunted it away. So I think that's an excellent next step.
Yeah, well, the MSP customers, they go to the MSP because they're the experts. They're the experts. They're going to keep the lights on. They're going to keep them ahead of the game, keep them protected. And your insurance advisor is exactly the same. You need a specialist to help you navigate through the complexity and stay up to date with what changes are coming forward. So it's just another specialist that you need to have in place.
Well, on that note, do you guys have any other takeaways or golden nuggets that you want people that have been listening today to walk away and practically do, and that will help them?
So one of the things we've been talking to everybody about is how security services affect insurance proposals, and it's kind of a big glaring one.
Yeah.
The next one that'll follow that will be AI. Because everyone's all talking about it, but the insurers currently in their framework exclude a lot of AI. And we now all instinctively use AI in, many of our little cheats and hacks for different things we do. But as that becomes more commonplace, we're going to have to be honest about it. And the insurers want to know, and we'll have to help the insurers understand how the MSPs use that AI. So I think that'll be the next little hurdle for us in the next 6 months. But we'll get there and we'll find a way.
I agree. That's next frontier, absolutely. Yeah. But I suppose the other thing, we're very open to have health checks with MSPs. This is our bread and butter, to help them understand and unpack their risks and compare it to their insurance. So we're very, very happy to help in that area.
Well, thank you so much, guys, for jumping on and making insurance exciting and impactful for our partners. No doubt we'll have you again on in the future. So thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, James.
Thanks, James.
Okay,
Appreciate
all the
it.
best. Cheers. Bye.